I mean, I could start this video totally glazing up all of The Walking Dead and the Telltale series, but I feel if you click on this video, man, you know. And if you don't know, go find out. Go play those games. They're incredibly good. And then come back and watch this video. But my main idea for this is just to be an absolute love letter to this entire story and all these characters. I'm going to go into very meticulous detail about like almost every line of like anything I want to bring up, I'm going to talk about it. And like any small little detail that I notice, I'm going to bring it up. And there's probably going to be a lot of talking about like little dialogue scenes, but truly this is going to be very fun to do, I think, for me. And I can't think of a better way to show my love and appreciation for this series and this characters than making this kind of analysis video about it. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to structure this series yet. I have a feeling that it's going to be a very long series. So if I tried to do the entire, like, let's say episode 1 in one video, it would probably end up being like a really long, really dense video. And I'm not sure I necessarily want to do that. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to split it up. As I'm working on it, I'll split it up into parts. I will release those parts as I finish them. And then once I am done with the entire season 1, I will put them all together into one video. And I'll release that onto my channel. So either way you'd like to view it, you can view them as they're coming out or as the one big thing as I put them out. That is up to you guys. Okay, I think that's everything out of the way. And let us jump straight into this over analysis. Thank you very much. Oh, one more thing actually before I start. This is heavily inspired by Croto's Mystery Shack's overanalyzing of Attack on Titan, because that shit is so good. And I will link every single one of his videos. I'll link his playlist in the description so you can see definitely how it's inspired. But his whole series is so good on that show, and so I would like to emulate even a little bit. If I can get like 1% of that in this series, I will be very, very happy. And it's kind of tough to do because like Attack on Titan is way more dense and has way more stuff going on than The Walking Dead. But I think as I get into this, you guys will see there's a similar level of explaining the character motivations here, especially with the dialogue. I mean, come on, the story is just incredibly well written, and Telltale is so damn good at writing dialogue, man. They are so good, realistic dialogue too. Okay, I'm just gonna stop, and we're just gonna get into the analysis. Thank you. The game opens with such a unique opening by having your main character, the person that you play as, start in the back of a cop car. I mean, that is some ballsy stuff, man. And just with no explanation at all, just to have and you know, there's obviously those preconceived notions about like back of a cop car as a criminal. Like having you play as a character who you really don't know much about, like starting out as that, I think it's very ballsy. And this cop clearly wants to interact with Lee for some reason. Whether it's to understand him better or to provoke him, we're not really sure yet. But the cop is definitely interested in interacting with Lee, and we see that because he's looking at him through the mirror, and then he gives him a little glare too. So us as a viewer, we're not really sure what's going to happen. Lee, then clearly feeling either ashamed or embarrassed, he averts his gaze, which already is showing us. I mean, these are like 3D models, yes, but the amount of expression that Telltale is able to get out of them, just off of this little interaction here, it's already very incredible. Notice the eyes. Notice how big they are, how expressive they are. Truly, it's such a good strategy, and this is in almost all of these early Telltale games. The eyes are so big, because that is the main, I mean, you obviously heard that expression, the eyes are the window to the soul. That is the main thing that tells us humans what another human is feeling. So, like, that, they do such a good job of paying attention to the eyes and really making them way larger than they are in real life, just to really get that expression out of the characters. And like, yeah, looking back, this game came out in 2012. Like, some of the animations are a little stiff and stuff like that, but man, it's really well done, I think. It holds up very well today. The cop then says,
"Well, I reckon you didn't do it then."
We're not really clear here if he is trying to understand Lee better or if he's trying to provoke him. We're not really sure. I mean, that could kind of have two meanings to it, right? This is also, as a player, when we're first introduced to one of the main game mechanics of this game, which is the whole dialogue select. And that really ties so nicely into the theme of this whole game, especially this first season, which is one of the main themes, which is truth and how truth is the ultimate form of currency almost. In this world that is fallen, being truthful and being honest with people is one of the only true things you can do to still have your humanity left. One little detail I really love about this opening cutscene here is if you look in the background, you can actually see the stranger driving past. And I'm not exactly sure if it's intentional or not, because he's not driving the car that you steal supplies from. Like, obviously, he might have two cars, but he is actually driving a pickup truck. And I'm not sure if that's intentional that you see him early, or if it's just they didn't have that many assets, so they had to reuse assets. Either way, it's interesting to think about, and it's cool to point out. The cop continues, and he says,
I've driven a bunch of fellas down to this prison. Lord knows how many. Usually it's about now I didn't do it.
And again, as a viewer, we are not sure at all is this cop, actually being sympathetic towards us, or is he trying to provoke us? Is he trying to get a reaction out of us? I mean, this officer is so sure, because he says, I've driven tons of people, and they always say, like, I didn't do it. They're always pleading with me, and the fact that Lee isn't pleading, really, it kind of opens even more questions up to the viewer. Does that mean that maybe Lee was caught so red-handed that it's almost unnecessary to state any of that? Like, why even try? I mean, you know what I mean? Or maybe he intends to plead guilty, which, honestly, if you look at where the story is going, where the character of Lee is going, and you can shape him a little bit, yes, but I truly think he was intending on pleading guilty. I think he knew what he did was horrible, and again, that truth and honesty, I think Lee was planning on being honest about it. And I think it's incredibly ballsy to open your story up like this. I mean, to have your character, and you as the player have no idea what this person did, it's pretty cool. I mean, again, it takes balls. At this point, the radio, the police radio goes off, and it says there's a 1091E in, I don't know, downtown, whatever. And that's actually a very real police code. I looked it up. It means a vicious, a wild animal bite. So already you can kind of see, like, hey, wait a minute. We're in the apocalypse, and there's a wild, like, what's going on here? And they actually followed up by saying it's a 91V, which means it's specifically a very vicious animal. So you'd have to imagine, right? You can kind of even put this little headcanon together in your mind of, like, someone got bit. Let's say, like, this is totally making this shit up, but let's say their mom got turned, right? And then, like, you can't fight that, obviously. It's horrible. I mean, oh God, you don't want to think about that. And so they would attack them. Very similar to how we see in season 3, like with Javi's family, like how their grandma turns and they don't know, like they don't know what to do. Someone who's, with peace and love, weaker than Javi would not be able to fight that off, and they would just succumb to it, right? And they would get bitten, maybe run away, and then, like, what do? You go to the cops, say, my grandma just attacked me and, like, bit me. No, you're probably gonna say, there was an animal that bit me, it hurts really bad, I'm gonna go to the hospital. You know what I mean? It's like, you could totally put this stuff together. It's such a good detail. And, like, that police code, they didn't need to do that. They totally could have just had a random number string. And I was fully expecting it. When I looked it up, I was fully expecting just to not be real. But nope, that is a very real police code, and it connects to the story incredibly well, too. It's very fun to see those little details. Then, as the cop and Lee, they talk more and more, we kind of see that the cop is maybe a little bit more sympathetic towards Lee. Maybe he's not trying to get a provoked response out of him. Maybe he's genuinely sympathetic to what happened with Lee, which just raises even more questions as a viewer. I mean, what truly happened here? As Lee and the cop kind of talk more, we figure out that Lee has a family drugstore. His family owns a drugstore in Macon. And again, that's a good Chekhov's gun, because later in this very episode, we will go to that exact drugstore. So again, kind of just that a little bit of that, like, foreshadowing type stuff. It's good. Through more exposition with the cop and Lee, we find out that Lee was actually tried for his sentence already, and he was found guilty of murder, and he is now being sent to the correctional facility to serve his life sentence. Well, we don't learn all of that information just yet, but the majority of it we learn here, where the cop says, "Oh, I've been following your case. the case is actually concluded, and we know that Lee is guilty. The cop also says that senatorial stuff he got mixed up in. So then, as a viewer, we can really kind of start putting the pieces into place. Like, right, we could figure out that he killed a senator, but we don't really know why he did that yet. He then says it's a real shame, that is, which is just, again, kind of opens up even more questions for the viewer. Because, like, why, if you killed a senator, why would a cop be sympathetic towards you? Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And as the cop is saying all that, we see a few police cars speed down the highway towards the city, which again is just even more foreshadowing that we, the player and the viewer, we know something is up because of The Walking Dead. We know an apocalypse is about to happen. But Lee, the actual character in the story, they have no idea. They could suspect all they want. But I love that disconnect between the information that us, the viewer, has and that the character of Lee has. The radio goes off again in the car, just saying that there's some medical personnel en route to the city. Just a good foreshadowing, again, proving that we know more than Lee does. Not only is it very ballsy to open with your lead character in the back of a cop car, it's also really smart to deliver exposition about the character. They keep talking, and we figure out that Lee is a professor at the University of Georgia, which it's like, again, it's so good. As a viewer, as a player, we're again asking so many questions. Like, why is a seemingly very nice, respectful professor in the back of a cop car for murdering a senator? Like, what? It's really good. It really reminds me of like comics or manga. The way in which, or like the opening episode of a television show, the way that they try and hook the viewer and the player to ask all these questions so that you'll keep playing, it's really, really good. It's really good writing. And all that on top of the fact that if you look at the way that they packaged and sold this game, this was a very different time for gaming. Like, very different. What I'm about to say, if you're a young kid, what I'm about to say might blow your mind a little bit. This game was free. The first episode of this game was completely free. So the way it worked was you could buy the game straight up for like I think it was $25, and it came with all 5 episodes. Or you could play the first episode for free, and then if you liked it so much, you could pay for the other episodes. And it didn't just work this way on Xbox 360. It was like this on all platforms, including mobile devices. Literally any phone you had back in the day, you could just pick it up and download this game. All 5 episodes on it. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's the first way I played this game, is I had a little iPod, like my parents got me for Christmas, and I just downloaded this game on it, and I was like, oh, what is this? I didn't understand any of the dialogue that was going on, and I didn't get past this opening cutscene because it was really boring, and I was like, really young. But that's actually how I first discovered this game, which I think is really interesting. And I think that really goes to show why the writing is so damn good this episode. Because they needed to hook people. If they wanted people to keep playing, if they wanted people to buy their game, they had to kind of start up these questions. And the questions are less so about the world. Like, if you look at shows or stories like Attack on Titan or Lost, there are a lot of questions in those stories, but the questions are about the world. I love so much that the questions we see here in The Walking Dead are specifically about the characters and the character motivations. It's just excellently well written. The cop then makes a comment about Lee's wife, and Lee very visibly gets upset and almost queasy. He really totally averts his gaze. And I mean, yeah, you could see on screen here. He's totally, yeah. This is also one of the few times in game that the game really kind of fucks with you. Like, no matter what piece of dialogue you pick here, Lee will not respond. He will like give a little grunt and then look away, which I always thought was really interesting because that doesn't really happen later in the game. And I think that is more just Telltale kind of experimenting with the genre, because the only other game that they really did in this style was The Wolf Among Us. So this was like their first game, second game, that was really in this style of like kind of a modern point and click adventure. And then the cop says, regardless, could just be you married the wrong woman. And that also gets a very emotional response out of Lee, because that's kind of an insane thing to say, knowing the context. And also, that is kind of as a player, where we can really kind of put the pieces in place. Like, okay, it seems like she probably cheated on him with the senator, and it was a crime of passion, which totally makes sense why the officer would be sympathetic to Lee's cause. Then the officer goes on a very long tirade about this guy who was in the back of his car one time and crying like a baby. And this serves two purposes. One, it tells us why the cop initially started this interaction with Lee. He believes that Lee is innocent. So when he said, well, I reckon you didn't do it, he truly thinks that, because Lee reacts totally opposite than people who are actually caught red-handed. People who actually 100% did it, they are the ones who scream and cry and say, it wasn't me. Whereas Lee is the exact opposite, showing the cop that maybe either he didn't do it, or it was the crime of passion, you can't help but feel a little bit sympathetic towards this guy. Again, showing that even now, before the apocalypse has even really started, we see that gray morality of people. Also, as the cop tells the story, he gets more and more into it. And that's kind of when he's starting to go into a second story, and he's clearly not focusing on the road. And that's when they end up hitting seemingly a person crossing the road, although it's very clearly a walker. Showing the viewer and the player a very clear walker, like not long before, but before our main character sees one. It's very good. It's just that little, like, the writers and the player, they kind of have the situation like, yeah, we know what's going on, but these people don't, but we know. And as this very long, dramatic crash is going on, every time I see the cop's arms, like, waving in the air, it makes me giggle, bro. I don't know why. It's just so funny. This animation is just so funny, bro. But after that, as that crash is happening, after that crash, Lee very, very heavily injures his leg, and also hits his head very hard. And as he's kind of coming to, as he's, like, opening his eyes, and we have that whole, like, scene of him, the main character coming to after being knocked out, we can actually hear in the background, it's pretty muffled, but you could hear someone screaming. The cop is screaming, and a bunch of, like, zombies growling, coming to him, and you can hear a few gunshots in the background, and then you can hear them eat him. And it's just a good detail that, like, I honestly did not even notice that detail until replaying it for this video. Like, a lot of this stuff, obviously, you notice here first time, but that kind of stuff, it's very cool, very subtle in the background. After the crash, as Lee wakes up, is also when we are introduced to the second main form of gameplay throughout this game, which is the actual, like, moving around, interacting with stuff, kind of puzzle solving aspect of it here. And this is also, there are a few ways this whole interaction can play out with the dead cop. You can actually pick up the shotgun shell early. And if you didn't know this, you can go over and just pick up the little shotgun shell. You can also try and pick up the shotgun, I believe, but Lee will, like, because he has his handcuffs on still, he like is not able to pick it up properly. Then you go over to the cop and kind of grab his keys, and then fucking stupid horror movie, like, cliche, like, drops the keys right next to the dude's mouth. And again, like, showing that disconnect between Lee and the viewer. Like, us as a player, we're like, fuck that. Do not put your hands anywhere near that man's mouth. And, like, even Lee is, like, pretty creeped out, because it's a dead dude, not because he thinks it's a zombie, but because he's putting his hands right next to a dead person. And, like, ooh, God, it's so much worse when you know the fact that that's a zombie, and, like, if he was just awake, Lee would just be fucked. Then we get a cheap little jump scare. Thank you very much, Telltale Games, for that one. And then we get the classic fumbling around until something happens. Although, again, if you grab the shotgun shell before you go over to the cop, then you just have it on you, and you just gotta put it in really quickly. Just shortens that a little bit, which is fun. Details like that are just really cool. It shows that, like, Telltale, they think about this kind of stuff. Like, why wouldn't you be able to pick up the shotgun shell beforehand? Like, that's an option that Lee would have. Why not, And obviously, that gunshot going off wakes up all the nearby walkers and kind of attracts all of them towards Lee. But I think that will do it for this first part of this series. Thank you very much for watching. Like I said, it's very long. It's very dense. I mean, that was what, maybe 5 minutes of gameplay, and I did a goddamn 20-minute video out of it. So that is kind of why I didn't want to, like, you can kind of see how it would be a lot of work just to do, like, all of episode 1 in one video. So that is kind of why I split it up this way. But thank you guys for watching. Hopefully the next one will be out soon. I'm not exactly sure when it's going to be out, though. Thanks, guys. See you later. Quick little post-video meta commentary here. The reason this video took me a little bit longer to make is, one, because I was experimenting with mainly doing just a specifically, like, editing video where the entire background is not like another gameplay footage. It's like specifically just footage from the game that I'm talking about, which was more difficult than I was expecting it to be. And also, I had an issue with some of the footage getting corrupted, and it was a whole thing. But so that's kind of why it took me a little bit longer to do this one. Hopefully the other ones won't take me as long, and I'm kind of getting to the groove of things. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and that's the end. Thank you, guys.